Andy, before we start the podcast proper today, I shared the podcast with my good lady wife, who listened and enjoyed the podcast. Very positive. She really liked it. I didn't say anything I shouldn't, which was good. However, she did report that she thought the intro music was a bit naff and cheesy.
Oh dear.
I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I thought it was fine, but maybe there's scope to improve.
Possibly. So what I've done is I've spent probably too long looking for some alternative bits of music we could use. So these are all royalty free. And so I'm going to play you three and get your opinion, see which one you like. You ready?
Okay,
There's number one.
number one.
What do you think?
No,
Why not?
it's a bit Lord of the Flies, Game of Thrones, killing dragons, isn't it?
It is a bit grand, isn't it? I thought I was trying to elevate us as a podcast that,
Very grand. No, no.
they're very grand.
If you go
Yeah.
for grand, definitely
We could wear some like military suits
some
and
sort of
hold swords because that's
armor.
what real men do, isn't it? We hold weapons and shout and eat beef. Isn't that what real men? Anyway, so we'll scrap that. Number two. Here comes number two. Thoughts?
I like it a lot more. That's
Ooh,
whimsical,
whimsical. I,
jovial,
I thought I felt a bit cowboy,
very high pace.
high pace. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, it might not always be good to too high pace, but I felt it was like a cowboy theme.
Yep,
I felt a bit Western, but it's a possible. There's a possible.
possible.
Here's number three, which I quite like. Hint, hint. What do you think?
I think it matches our brand, doesn't it?
What is our brand?
So his podcast is all about exploring, seeking, discussing, debating. I feel that probably matches the brand identity of the pod. So my thoughts and feelings will be a third one.
Let's go for that one.
Good idea.
Hello, welcome to Other People's Kids, a podcast about Andy and Joey's adventures in fostering and adoption.
Hello and welcome to everyone who is discovering this podcast. Hope you enjoy it and good to have you.
Yep, we're two dads talking all things fostering, adoption, parenting, and more. Good evening, Andrew.
Good evening, Joe.
Good evening again. I'm glad we sorted that now. Hopefully, the good lady wife will appreciate and enjoy the new intro to our pod.
Well, let's get our feedback next week, shall we?
We will. We'll be changing it again, perhaps. Who knows? So today we're doing a couple of things. We are going to mainly be talking about our theme, which is the same but different.
Or the same or different.
The same or different, or same and different? One of those.
Hmm.
Can I talk about how fostering adoption, whilst they share a lot in common, caring for a child, providing a home, safe home, etc., they are fundamentally very different things in how they work out. And I think it's important for anyone considering fostering adoption to kind of know that, be aware of it, in order to be as advised as possible when considering whether to do them.
We're going to look at 4 or 5 different things, aren't we? And we're going to explore, is it the same or is it different?
Exactly. Yeah. What is the same about it? What is different? Before we kind of get into the meat of that, as mentioned, we have now launched the podcast officially.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe and follow. It is available on most podcast platforms. So there you go. So please do follow us. If you want to follow us on YouTube, you can subscribe. You can download us on podcast platforms. You can like and rate and all that stuff. It'd be fantastic. And if you've got any feedback or want to perhaps show an interest in being interviewed on the pod, you can email us at hello@otherpeopleskids.co.uk. Right, let's make a start. So we've got kind of 5 kind of discussion points on this difference between fostering and adoption. So the first one, I think, is really important is to define the roles. So what is fostering and what is adoption? So Andy, do you want to start with adoption? In your mind, how would you define adoption?
Well, I guess the role of an adopter or adoptees, if you're adopting as a couple, the role is you are becoming that child or children's new parents. So if they
Mm,
had a parent or parents, and usually they would know those parents, sometimes they don't, if they've gone to adoption early. So they may not have any memory or knowledge of kind of their parents, but at some point, biologically, they would have had some parents.
mm.
Something's happened, and then adopters, in all sense of the word, become the new parents for that child or children.
Well, you filled up most of the dictionary for that definition, but it's good. Yeah, that is
Okay,
it. You're essentially becoming their parents, aren't you? Becoming their legal parents in all sense of the word.
I could have just said that. I elaborated. Sorry. Yeah, you are coming their new parents.
We do like to elaborate. Whereas I think fostering is very different. So what people often don't realise is the actual primary goal of a foster carer, first and foremost, is to get that child, ideally, if it's safe and the best thing for that child, back to the family they're from, back to their birth parents. Often there's a lot of misconceptions about fostering. It's about, taking kids off of, parents in order to feed them to adopters and all this sort of thing. But really, primarily, in my experience of fostering, the majority of the time, children are hopefully going back to birth parents or someone within that family in what we call a kinship placement or SGO sometimes. And, of the kids we fostered, nearly all of them have gone back that route rather than into adoption. So adoption's usually sort of the last resort. So fostering, the aim is to get the child back to the birth parents. If that's not possible, foster carers provide a secure and loving home to children so they can grow up, give them a secure base, maintaining those connections to those birth parents through contact or family time, as we might call it. And the children are very much part of the family, but kind of in a less formal way, because legally it's a bit different, as we'll discuss, but they are very much part of the family long-term fostering.
That is
That's,
a
my,
very
that's
long.
even longer than
So
yours.
summarize it in one line. And what's your role as a foster parent in one line?
Providing temporary care to children for as long as they need.
Provide temporary care with. Okay. Because you are parenting, aren't you? So do you feel like you're like their temporary parent, or do you not feel like a parent at all? Because you are doing parenting.
I'd say for me and for my partner, we feel like parents. We approach it that we are their parents. I think it's a tricky one because it's a slightly different relationship because there's some limitations in decision making and some safer caring and practice and stuff that you would parent slightly differently, how you might parent your own children. However, we want children in our home for whatever time they're with us, whether it's a weekend or 3 years, to feel loved, secure, kind of, and part of the family. So that's
Yeah.
our kind of our main that's our main driver really for them to feel secure and safe. And all foster carers I meet are like that.
Mm,
It leads to incredible pain when children move on, but that's kind of part of the deal, really.
yeah.
So yeah, so I think that's our definition. So we've got a very long definition of adoption and of fostering. Number two, then, kind of discussion points. This is getting to kind of the legal side of it, or the decision making, or what we call PR. So PR being parental responsibility. So when fostering, it's quite different. So actually, as a foster care, I don't have parental responsibility over that child. The local authority do, and they share it with the birth parent. What that means in practice is sometimes I need to get permission as a foster parent or foster carer to do certain things. It could even be things like haircuts. It could be things like getting passports can be an issue because I don't have legal PR as a parent. I therefore have a slightly different relationship. So I'm having to work with the social worker of that child and the local authority in order to make decisions about some of their care and about some of the things they can or can't do. And
Mm.
that's quite different, is it, to adoption? So what happens in adoption?
Well, it's very similar because there's two steps in adoption because
Mm,
you are placed with children and then you have to wait a certain amount of time before you go for the formal adoption order. So
mm,
until you get that order, they're not legally your children, if I recall correctly. So when a child or children are in a birth family, the PR's with the parents. When that child goes into care, then the PR is jointly owned between the local authority and the parents still.
mm,
When those children are in place with new adopters or adoptee, then there is shared PR. So in that kind of year when we had the children living with us, there were certain things we weren't allowed to do. I think it's similar to you guys. Like I'm not sure we could take them abroad. And like I think we couldn't get a tattoo. Not that I
Mm.
would want to tattoo my
What, you
children.
you get a tattoo
No,
or
no, the children couldn't get a tattoo if they
well,
wanted
ear
it.
piercings is one, isn't it, as well?
Ear
Ear piercings
piercings.
and things like that.
But there are certain things we would had to have sought permission from the local authority for in
Mm.
that interim time for when they're placed with us until we go for that final adoption order. But once we've got that final adoption order and it's been signed off by a court, then all PR becomes us.
I see. So how is your son's tattoo? How's it looking?
The anchor is bulging. He's getting bigger now. He's getting a right unit.
Yeah, he's not quite old enough for a tattoo yet, I'm guessing.
I think it's gone up in age. Is that 18 now?
I
Or is that
don't know.
smoking? I think smoking, you can't smoke at 18.
Well, I think smoking, aren't they bringing in where they're increasing the age that you can't smoke or you can't buy cigarettes to sort of wipe out smoking in a generation?
Does that include vaping as well?
I don't know. I hope it does. Vaping's quite annoying.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what age you have to be. It used to be 16. I have to check that.
Yeah, I have to check that. It's not particularly relevant, but there,
No,
thank you,
no,
Andy.
that's
So that's
fine.
better. So it's quite different. So you've got that initial stage, it's sort of not like a probation, but like an initial period of
Yeah.
at the beginning of the adoption, where I guess where it can be quite a difficult time. It's all very new. But then once they're sort of settled, and then you have that final kind of court hearing, don't you? Is that where you had that picture done with your parents and your wife's parents, and you're all in the
Yeah.
courtroomy thing, and it's really
Yeah.
wonderful. And
You
yeah,
have to go to a courtroom and there's a legal document which has to be signed.
yeah.
I think you have to wait a minimum, I think it's like 12 weeks, but we had various delays and I think it took like nearly a year.
Oh wow.
Yeah, to get it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember when that picture came up on my memories recently, and yeah, it's lovely. It's quite a special moment, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that's kind of PR, the kind of legal side or decision making is quite different. And another area where things are obviously different is levels and length of support. So as a foster carer, I'm working on behalf of the local authority to care for this child. I will have a assigned supervisor and social worker who supports me as a foster carer. The child will also have a social worker looking out for their needs, a child social worker. I will have regular visits from my social worker, review meetings. We have annual reviews of our status as foster carers. There'll be looked after medicals we take the children to, and possibly more depending on the needs of the child and you as carers and the complexity of what's happening. So it's quite involved. So I feel, if we need support with a child, we'll be speaking to the social worker, whether it's around their education, whether it's a health need, whether, even as foster carers, we sometimes get money towards things like beds and cots and prams and things like that, just
Mm.
practical stuff. So we feel quite supported in many different ways. Andy, what about adoption? In terms of support, how does that work? Does it sort of start and then phase out, or what's the difference?
It is similar, and actually, whatever journey you go on, you will get to know social workers pretty well because everyone and their dog has a social worker.
Hmm.
So the children had a pre-adoption social worker. And I think that changed when the placement was made. My wife and I had our own social worker, and you get that interaction with social workers after their children are placed with you, and again, all the way up to the adoption order. And when you get that adoption order, it's like driving off a cliff. It just stops literally overnight. You don't get anything. They're like, right, job done. They're off our books. They're on your books. You crack on, mate.
Wow.
And it can feel quite dramatic and feel quite lonely because you
Yeah,
had
I can
all
imagine.
that support from the local authority. We didn't go on much, but there is lots of training and lots of information you can do and get from the local authority. Some is more helpful than others, but they are good at running the odd course,
Hmm.
and you get that regular input from a social worker and their wider team, which is really useful. But when that adoption order comes, yeah, you don't get anything. There is something called the Adoption Support Fund, which you'll probably tap into later down the line, and we're accessing it now for various therapies and various interventions to help our children learn and socialize better. So there is some financial support there for us as a family unit. There's pupil premium as well. So children from the care system, I know their schools will get a little bit of a bonus bit of
Mm.
money from the local authority, isn't it? Every child gets a certain allocation of money from the government, which goes to the school. But I think children from care, they get a bit of a bonus, don't they? It's called pupil premium.
Yeah,
So
so it's
yeah,
still so it's so yeah, so the child has spent any time in care, they're recognised as care experience, therefore they get pupil premium,
yeah.
which I think in some of the different nations in Wales and Scotland has slightly different terminology, but
Okay.
essentially, yeah, funding to recognise that they may have additional sort of learning needs as a result of the trauma of being in care, essentially, isn't it?
Mm. And that
Um,
could be quite specific. I know for the school, well, my daughter, everyone got like a Leavers hoodie, and she got that for free because they just used her pupil premium. But then other thing could be quite broad because they have to evidence how they spent the money. So
mm.
if they've said, oh yeah, we bought a new swing, and it will benefit my daughter if she uses it, but it happens to benefit everyone within the school as well, then I think that's okay from their perspective. They can justify that.
Yeah, no, I think because from my experience being in education for a long time, it is a tricky area, isn't it? Sort of what justifying what is going to have a positive impact on that child. Is buying iPads for
Yeah.
like all the students and putting the money towards that going to help, or is it actually they need a one-to-one support? And I know lots of foster carers, and that's a real struggle where you've got schools who say, well, yeah, we're spending the money on, we've got some new headphones or earphones or whatever, or iPads.
Mm.
Actually, they're advocating for the child, or they need more one-to-one support. And it's
Yes.
those sort of areas can be quite tricky, can't it?
I have really enjoyed sending passive aggressive emails to the head teacher saying, could you evidence over the last 6 months how you spent my children's pupil premium, and see what they've said. It's been quite enjoyable sending those.
Oh, you're very mean. So that was just for the listeners. So that was the ASF, so Adoption Support Fund, which adopters can access or apply to. So I assume that's for, there's therapeutic interventions needed and things like that, isn't it?
Yeah,
For the child.
various therapies.
Yeah.
And then you have educational psychologists come in and do assessments and all sorts of assessments by various professionals. So yeah, there is a bank of professionals who can help you if you need it, which
Hmm.
is good.
I think at this point it might be worth referencing SGO or Special Guardianship Order, which is kind of sort of like closer to adoption than fostering, but it's legally slightly different. And also there's a bit more support tied to it from the
Mm.
local authority. So we're not going to go into any great detail about it now, because in about 2 weeks, I'm interviewing someone who is a SGO parent. Who will talk us through kind of what SGO is, but it's worth noting that there is some different, there's some between ground kind of, but we'll get onto that when we do. Brilliant. So number 4 then, Andy, in our kind of lists of differences and things to discuss, I want to think about a bit of a different one. This one is public perception, because I think for me, I've always felt that fostering and adoption are perceived quite differently by people. So I don't know, how have you got any thoughts on how adoption is perceived by people, either positively or negatively?
I think, I mean, every person I've spoken to about our adoption journey has always been quite positive.
Mm.
I've never had any negative feedback of why we did it. I don't have much thoughts about it. Have you had different opinions of what?
Well, I'm just aware that, sometimes with adoption, I mean, I know, even people close to me, my family have said, adoption's really hard because I know this person who adopted and it was really bad and really hard and they're really struggling. Almost like a negative view of adoption because of this one example they've heard of someone they've known. I just wondered if you'd ever had that or anyone sort of feeling like that.
Yeah, you often hear those kind of one in a thousand stories where an
Mm,
adoption actually breaks down, so that there is a possibility that the adoption placement order does break down, and
mm,
sometimes the children do have to go back into the care system, I understand, but I would say it's rare.
mm,
It's terrible for the child or children to go through another loss and loss of a parent, so it must be traumatic for them.
mm,
um I hear a lot about fostering, that people couldn't become foster carers because they would find it hard to say goodbye, and
mm.
having reoccurring goodbyes and losses of children. And I guess if you're that person who finds it very hard to say goodbye, or think you would be, the position would be hard. Maybe think again whether fostering is right for you. But I guess until you're in that position, you don't really know how you may or may not react.
Yeah, there's a lot of people when I say foster care, that's how they respond. Oh, it's really amazing what you do. I can never say goodbye to children, and that's actually our fifth point. So we'll put an end to
Oh,
that
okay.
now.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're broaching to our fifth point. You're gonna ruin our clarity. But on the kind of public perception thing, I think for me, I think the internet and social media is quite dangerous
Mm,
because if you talk about adoption or fostering online or either of them,
mm.
usually the people who comment and are the loudest are the people who maybe have had difficult times.
Yeah.
Maybe adoption has fallen through. Maybe they applied to your foster care but weren't allowed for X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
They're often the first people to comment and to shout online. And what that does is, I think, sadly, is when you look online, there's a post about become an adoptive parent or a foster care or whatever, and there's a lot of negativity. And I always worry that's going to put people off because in your mind you think, well, it's obviously really hard. 95% of the time, it's really terrible. But
Mm.
usually that's because the people who are the 99% who are done, it's gone really well. Adoptive placements or foster carers, etc., are just getting on with life, enjoying being parents, just doing it. They're not online whinging and moaning and
Yeah.
having a go every 2 seconds. So I often say that when I'm talking to groups of people considering being foster carers, don't
Yeah.
listen to all that. Yes, listen to members of your family who have experience, but ultimately, majority of the time, it's a really positive thing.
Just one thing around public perception. I remember a really strange personal reaction. The first kind of 6 months of when we adopted, I felt a real need to justify that, oh, that we could have children of our own if we wanted to. I felt like I was defending mine or our biology, but because we were choosing adoption as our plan A, I felt a bit insecure that people might think, oh, they couldn't have their own children, so that's why we're adopting. So I was going around, oh, I could have had children if I wanted to. I chose not to. I chose to adopt them, and now I don't really care what people think of Phil. But initially, I had that perception that people were thinking about me, but that as a personal thing.
No, thanks for sharing that. I think because you can jump to that conclusion, I think. And
Yeah,
I think, but yeah, definitely with any parenting, adoption or fostering or whatever, I think ignoring what other people think is quite a big important part. Okay, so the fifth and final thing we're going to think about in terms of the difference between adoption and fostering is kind of the obvious one, is saying goodbye or the ending of it. So in adoption, I'm assuming, obviously the aim is kind of permanency, isn't it?
that's the aim for it. Yeah,
Whereas forever family, that child is now in your family, you're committed to them forever, and etc. It's wonderful. But fostering is obviously very different. And as you said earlier, obviously when you talk about fostering, a lot of people say what puts me off mainly is I wouldn't be able to say goodbye, get too attached, and that's kind of a good thing. That's
mm.
what you want in foster care, is to get so attached that it's really painful when those children go, because they have formed those really positive, secure, safe attachments with you as their caregivers. And it is really difficult when a child moves on. It's heartbreaking. I still, even now talking about it, I can quite quickly get quite emotional if I'm not careful, because probably saying goodbye to children we've cared for has been some of the hardest sort of days of my life emotionally.
Mm.
It's a different kind of grief, because obviously it's not death, but you're saying goodbye to someone you've invested time in and love, and yeah, and it's always really hard.
I think I would add to that. Don't underestimate the impact you're having on those children's lives, because
Mm.
um, one of my children was older, one of them was quite young, but the saying goodbye to their foster parents was quite tough,
Mm.
and tough for the foster parents as well, because it was their first placement, hadn't done it before, so I think naturally that they built quite an attachment to them. But even now, many years of adopting our children, we still talk about the foster carers regularly.
Mm.
The first kind of year to maybe 2 years, we did meet up again with the foster carers, maybe like once or twice a year. That's probably faded. But as the children have grown up and have tried to make sense of where they come from and the journey they made into our forever family, yeah, we have talked about maybe re-engaging with the foster parents and maybe meeting them again. So I think the children go through phases of wanting to revisit that period of their life. They were with foster parents about 11 months. I don't know what the average is with you, but is that kind of typical or
Probably a bit longer.
okay?
It depends really. So if they're going to adoption or whether they go to a kinship placement within the family, um, yeah, maybe a year to 2 years has been our experience generally.
Yeah.
But we're just one lot of foster carers. I mean, the good news is, I mean, for us, the majority of the children we've fostered, we've maintained relationships with, and that's been really wonderful. So some, we see these, the family members they've gone to, or where they've gone to for parents or adopters, we see as really good friends,
Yeah.
and we're very much seen as part of their wider family of those
Mm.
children. We see them most holidays, we're sort of meeting up and spending time with them. That's probably one of the privileges of being a foster carer, is seeing children and just how they're flourishing in their new homes with their forever families, to
Mm.
use that term, is wonderful. So there's a real positive in it as well. It's really hard, but it's also wonderful to see them in that permanent place, building attachments, feeling safe and secure and thriving. It is important as well when we think about endings. Whenever a child comes into care, particularly with adoption, often adoption is celebrated, and quite rightly. Adoption is a celebration. It's a wonderful thing when a child who needs a home has got good parents or parent, and adoption happens. But at the same time, it's kind of a two-edged or double-edged sword, isn't it? Because there's also that bitterness of, well, this is actually someone losing their child as well.
Mm.
And the same when some child comes into care, maybe temporary, but maybe permanent, that whilst, you're excited to be caring for this child, a birth parent has lost the child for whatever reason, for whatever has gone on, whatever they've done is kind of irrelevant in a way. As a human being, they've lost a child, and that's
Mm.
a significant event. And I think we always try to hold that in mind whenever a child is going into permanency, from
Mm.
our care, or a child comes into our care, actually holding in mind this is a significant loss for that parent.
I mean, a lot of really good natured people come up to us and said, "Oh, they're so lucky to be in your family. They're so
Mm,
lucky." And I kind of know what they mean, but no, they weren't lucky in the sense that their parents beated them and took drugs and didn't
yeah.
feed them for days on end.
Mm,
They weren't lucky that their parents probably had really rubbish upbringings
mm,
and parents who didn't love them or couldn't love them, and this cycle of abuse and neglect is just circling. So no, they weren't lucky. No, they're not lucky but they don't have their birth parents now. They weren't lucky saying goodbye to their temporary foster parents. Yes, they're in a good, loving place now, but no, I wouldn't say they're lucky.
mm,
And just reflecting of how traumatic this has been for them and will remain traumatic for the rest of their lives. So I get what people are saying, and I understand the heart and the warmth behind it, but it's so much. I mean, the birth parents are not lucky to have lost their children. They're
no.
probably devastated that this has happened, and their birth family did love them a lot, but
Mm,
just couldn't look after them in a safe and meaningful way. So because of that danger and neglect and abuse, they had to be removed, which is tragic and terrible for everyone involved.
mm. There is some really good, sort of people who are now adults who are care experienced to do work around this, around sort of recognizing that yes, it was that they're pleased that they were fostered or adopted long term, and they're really grateful, and they love their adopted parents. But actually, we need to recognize the sadness that they lost out on something. There was trauma,
Yeah.
but particularly when you think about children from maybe a different, ethnic background, who may be going to a family or that's different to their own in terms of heritage, and actually that can have longer lasting effects on them socially in terms of their sense of identity.
Mm.
But that's probably something for another pod to look into, because it's really interesting. And I think sometimes adopters and foster carers can be a bit tentative about it because you want to defend what you do, but actually I think we need to recognize that it is a really sad part of what we do, that these children are coming from homes that, you rightly said, that they are loved, but sometimes they're not able to be kept safe, and that's why.
I guess your goodbyes are saying goodbye to children, but your life returns back to pre-fostering, isn't it? Where adopters, you have different goodbyes because you're saying goodbye to your life as you knew it before adopting children, because your life literally changes overnight. And we went from having no kids to having two kids in literally 24 hours. So anything you knew, enjoyed, had just changed completely overnight.
That's an interesting perspective. Yes, it's also saying goodbye to your old way of life, I
Yeah,
suppose, isn't it? Whereas with
absolutely.
fostering, you're right. So it sort of comes in and out.
Yeah.
And also depending on, if we have siblings, if we have one child, two, three child, etc., it changes. But yeah, no, it's interesting for adopters. Yeah, that's helpful, isn't it? That actually you're saying goodbye to your old way of life.
And now for something completely different.
So, Andy, as we come to the end of the podcast, we always like to finish with something a little bit different. So, I've got a question for you, which is, what is your favourite family meal? How do meal times work? What do you like to?
Mealtime.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a modern man, Joe. I cook all the food in my house. Apart from Christmas Day, the wife makes Christmas dinner. But apart from that, I cook for children's meal. They have their own kind of kiddie food,
Mm.
and the wife and I have our box meal from Gusto. Other boxes are available, but we have that. So we eat together around the same table at the same time. But I have to cook two meals simultaneously at once. I am amazing. I know. You look at the smile on your face.
The smile on my face because I'm wondering whether to comment on the fact that your box meals are basically one step away from a microwave meal. It's just open packets, plop it in a pan, and away you go.
You literally
you're not grinding spices, are you, Andy?
You are grinding spices. Sometimes with these recipes, you need a BTEC in food economics, it seems, for some of the instructions and ingredients. They're outrageous.
I will reserve my judgment. I'm amazed. That's amazing that you do all the cooking though. No, in all honesty though, when I visit, you often cook and it is very nice.
Yeah,
We're
I'm
recently having what did you make? Some little dumplings, some little Chinese dumplings. I remember having those recently.
Yeah,
Lovely.
yeah. Homemade pizzas. Yeah, homemade pizzas go down well. Friday night tends to be pizza night, so we make homemade pizzas every Friday. And when the weather's nice, we have fire pizzas, fire oven pizzas. That's always a good thing. How about you guys?
So yeah, so we always sit around the table. We have a thing in the evening. It's quite a big thing for us. Sit around, have a chat, eat our food together. Popular meals. Toad in the hole is always very popular. My wife as well has taught herself. She does a majority of the cooking. I do some. She does a majority because she's much better at it than me. She's recently taught herself how to cook lots of Vietnamese dishes. So she's cooked pho quite a lot, which is like a broth with beef and noodles and vegetables and various spices, and it is amazing. So we all love having that together. And in terms of sort of routines on a Friday, that's the one day we might sit on the sofa and maybe watch TV and have our food. At the moment, we're watching Race Across the World, which is a brilliant program, which you all love.
My youngest child, meal times tend to be a little bit of a contentious time. And if he's just feeling unregulated, we just find it's much easier just for him to have it on his lap in front of a TV.
You have to be flexible, don't you? Yeah.
Let's be flexible. And because like when I grew up, you sat at the table and you had whatever's put in front of you and you ate it, and that was it. We sat there and you had to ask to leave. I'm probably a bit more liberal with my children. I think you can have that preconception of what mealtime should be. It's a formula. Oh, I had it this way, so my children should have it that way. But of course, the children we're adopting might have all sort of different needs and issues around food and sitting still for a long period of time. So I would say just hold it lightly. And does it really matter? It's awesome to have meals around the table where every time we do have meals a lot of the time around the table. But if he's feeling unregulated and just kicking off, just have your fish fingers in front of Peppa Pig, mate. That's fine.
Yeah, it's good to have those routines, isn't it? So the routines we found for children, particularly, just knowing, eating the same sort of time of day, knowing that on a Friday we have this, we sit together and blah, blah. The routine's really helpful. But you're right, it's having that flexibility, not to create massive issues because you're trying to force children to eat or conform in a certain way that you expect. Food certainly would be another great topic to talk about meal times. Because often that can be an area of real conflict when you're with a child who's got issues around that. Brilliant. That's really good answer. Thanks, Andy. So either you have been listening to the pod and you want to give us some feedback or ask any questions, or perhaps there's a person or you yourself would like to be interviewed on the pod, please do get in touch. It's hello@otherpeopleskids.co.uk.
Joe, what's happening on our next pod?
Thanks, Andy. So we've got two pods in the making at the moment. Very exciting. So the first one we've got on the way is an interview with Stuart, who's a special guardian parent or special guardian order parent. He's also a parent, foster parent. He also trains foster carers as well. He's a generally brilliant guy. So we're going to be interviewing him, hopefully to unpick and find out a bit more about SGO, what that means and how that looks in family life. And the second podcast is a little bit of a secret, but I'll let you in on a little bit of it, which is it's a special podcast for the start of Foster Care Fortnight. And it's going to be recorded somewhere a little bit different.
A remote location, other people's kids on tour.
On tour. We're going to have a mini one-stop tour.
Yeah.
We're going to record somewhere different. But stay tuned and make sure you subscribe and like and follow whatever the young people do on this media platform things in order to listen to that when it comes out in a few weeks.
Yeah, we've got lots of subscribers on our YouTube channel already. So yeah, do check that out.
Oh yeah, last thing then. Do you want to know how many downloads our podcast has had in the last couple of hours?
Yes, please.
Since launch. 18.
That's good, isn't
Not
it?
too bad. That's probably mostly our mums.
Mainly your mum, possibly my mum who doesn't know about it yet. So you launched it when? Last night?
Well, basically last night I set it to launch today at 10 a.m.
Right.
So that's this morning. So we're now in the evening. So it's had a day.
Episode 1's had 28 views.
So 28 views. Wow. That's pretty good. I don't actually know, because the thing that measures the downloads is the sort of pod host thing. I don't know if that includes views and things on Spotify and Apple and things. So I'll do some research.
Exciting time. Well, thank you for listening. If you've listened to us, thank you for subscribing and liking.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Other People's Kids podcast. If you want updates when new episodes are released, please subscribe and look out for our social media accounts coming soon.